It was a day like any other, until it wasn't. I was sitting at the kitchen table when my parents sat me down, their faces pale, their voices trembling with a weight I couldn't quite place. "We're getting a divorce," my mother said, her words hanging in the air like a sudden storm cloud. My heart dropped. It wasn't just a word or a decision. It felt like the ground beneath me had cracked open, leaving nothing but emptiness. I looked over at my sibling, my constant companion, my partner in crime. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. We weren't just hearing that our parents were splitting up. We were hearing that our lives would be torn apart. No more living in the same house. No more seeing each other every day. No more shared laughter over dinner. We were suddenly on separate paths, thrust into different worlds with no map to guide us. The house felt hollow, and with every day that passed, the absence of my sibling was a deafening silence. Our parents' decision to divorce wasn't just about them, it was about us too. Our childhood, our memories, our bond, shattered. I didn't know how to navigate the new normal. The phone calls became fewer, the visits non-existent. And with time, even the memories of what once was began to fade, replaced by new realities. But something lingered, deep within me, a question. What happened to the person who used to be my whole world? What was their life like? Where had they gone? These questions swirled in the back of my mind, unanswered, but never forgotten. Little did I know, the universe had its own plans. And one day, years later, fate would bring us back together in a way I could never have imagined. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city and state in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Years of silence. The days after the divorce felt like a blur, a never-ending haze of confusion and disbelief. It was as if the world had suddenly shifted on its axis, leaving everything I knew unrecognizable. I remember the silence that filled the house after the announcement. No more laughter, no more sibling banter, no more feeling like I had someone by my side who truly understood me. My world had collapsed, and I was left standing in the rubble, alone. The hardest part wasn't just the end of my parents' marriage, it was the way it tore us apart. It was the absence of my sibling, the void that seemed to grow with each passing day. We had always been inseparable, a team, a unit, and now, just like that, we were separated, like two puzzle pieces scattered across different places, struggling to find their way back together. I couldn't understand why this was happening to us. Why couldn't we have stayed together, like we'd always dreamed? I couldn't even remember the last time I saw my sibling. It felt like a lifetime ago. After the divorce, we were shuffled into different lives, different homes, and different realities. My parents' decisions had created a divide between us that I couldn't overcome. It wasn't like I didn't try to reach out. I remember the countless times I would look for a way to get in touch, asking my mom if I could call them, or hoping my dad would send a letter with their new address. But the answer was always the same. They're fine. Don't worry about it. Those words never comforted me. They only pushed me further into this feeling of abandonment, like I was chasing a ghost. The first few months were the hardest. I had no idea what they were doing, where they were, or how they were handling the change. I wondered, did they think about me the same way I thought about them? Did they miss me? Did they even remember who I was anymore? All the questions I had went unanswered. The silence was deafening, and as the weeks turned into months, that silence began to feel permanent. It was like we had never existed in each other's lives. I had to create a new reality, a new identity, without them. I made new friends, adjusted to my new life, but none of it ever felt complete. There was always a part of me that was missing, a hole I couldn't fill. I tried not to think about it, but no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the thought of my sibling, of what we used to be, lingered in the back of my mind. The holidays were the worst. Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, they all came and went, and I couldn't escape the ache in my chest. My parents had their new routines, their new lives, but nothing felt right without the person who had always been there. The empty chair at the dinner table was a constant reminder of what I had lost. I'd look at my parents and see the sadness in their eyes, but I couldn't understand why they didn't seem to care about what had happened to us. Why hadn't they tried harder to keep us together? It felt like we had been discarded, like our bond was disposable. Every time I went through the motions of daily life, school, friends, the usual teenage chaos, I would find myself wondering what my sibling was doing. Was their life as lonely as mine? Were they feeling the same weight of the silence? Did they ever lie awake at night, thinking about the life we had lost? The years stretched on, and slowly, the pain began to numb. It became easier to pretend that I had moved on. I kept busy. I kept my mind occupied. But there was always that nagging thought, the one that wouldn't let me forget. My sibling. Were they okay? Were they still out there somewhere, living a life without me? The worst part of it all was that I didn't even know how to search for them. The world had changed since the divorce. We had been thrust into different lives, different cities, different circles. I didn't even know where to begin. It felt like they were a memory, slipping further and further away. But what kept me awake at night, what haunted me most, was this simple question: did they miss me the way I missed them? And as the years passed, that question stayed with me, unanswered and unresolved, locked away in the deepest parts of my heart. It wasn't until much later that I would finally get the answer I had longed for. But in that moment, all I could do was wonder and wait. Growing up, apart life. After the divorce felt like stepping into a completely different reality, one that didn't include my sibling. It was strange at first, how easily the world seemed to move on without us. It wasn't just the small things that had changed. New homes, new neighborhoods, new routines. It was everything. The air felt different. The way people spoke to me was different. Even my own reflection felt altered. The life I had known was gone, and in its place was a series of days that blurred together, disconnected and strange. We had always been inseparable, from childhood fights over who would sit in the front seat to late-night talks about our dreams. Everything we knew was shared. But suddenly, we were living in two different worlds, forced to build lives without each other. The absence was palpable, yet it was one of those things that couldn't be acknowledged. How do you admit that you miss someone so deeply when you don't even know if they're still thinking of you? It was like trying to keep a flame alive in the middle of a storm. You wanted to believe it was still there, but the wind kept blowing it out. At first, I tried to keep busy. School was a distraction. I threw myself into my studies, my extracurricular activities, anything to avoid the ache. But no matter how many new friends I made or how many times I laughed with my classmates, there was always this lingering feeling in the back of my mind. What was my sibling doing? Did they even miss me? Were they adjusting better than I was? These questions were like a loop in my head, and no matter how much I tried to silence them, they always came back. I never spoke to anyone about it. Not my friends. Not my new family members. They wouldn't understand. To them, I was just another kid dealing with the aftermath of a divorce. But for me, it was more than that. It was the loss of my closest companion, the one person who knew me better than anyone. My life felt incomplete without them, and I was too scared to admit it, even to myself. New school, new friends. I tried to fit in, but it was different. It was hard to bond with people when my thoughts were constantly consumed by the absence of my sibling. There were moments when I would sit in class, and I would glance around, imagining what it would be like if they were sitting beside me. What would we be talking about? Would they be as lost in their own world as I was in mine? I would catch myself wondering if they were happy, if they had found the kind of comfort that I couldn't seem to grasp. I wanted to believe that they were. I wanted to believe that somehow they had made new memories without me. But there was always this deep, gnawing fear that they were just as lonely as I was. Sometimes the missing part of my life would hit me all at once, like a wave crashing over me when I least expected it. It would be on a Sunday afternoon when everyone else was laughing around the dinner table. It would be during holidays when the empty space across from me felt heavier than usual. I'd find myself daydreaming about them, wondering if they still had the same laugh, if they liked the same music, if they still remembered how we used to talk about everything, no matter how insignificant. Was there still a connection between us, even though time had torn it apart? Or had that connection been buried along with everything else? There were moments when I would catch snippets of conversations between my parents, things they'd say without realizing I was listening. It wasn't often, but when it did happen, I would hear something about my sibling, maybe a new school they were attending, or a place they had moved to. Those tiny pieces of information felt like lifelines. They were brief, but they made me feel closer to them, even if just for a moment. And then, the moment would pass, and I would be left with the same questions, unanswered. As time went on, I began to accept that I might never know the answers. I began to build a life around the silence, to fill the space with whatever I could. I learned to adapt, to live without the constant presence of my sibling. But even as I found new routines, I never stopped wondering. There was always a part of me searching for them, for some sign that they were out there, that they were doing okay. And yet, the silence remained. Holidays and empty seats holidays were always a time of togetherness. They were supposed to be filled with laughter, with joy, with family. But after the divorce, those moments became some of the hardest to endure. Each holiday, whether it was Christmas, Thanksgiving, or even birthdays, felt like a stark reminder of what I no longer had. The house would be decorated, the meals would be prepared, and everyone would be smiling, but there was always a noticeable absence. The chair across from me, where my sibling used to sit, was always empty, and that empty chair, with its vacant space, seemed to haunt me every time I looked at it. It wasn't just the physical absence that hurt, it was the emotional gap, the laughter that we once shared, the inside jokes that only we understood, the comfort of knowing that no matter what happened, we had each other. Now, all of that was gone, replaced by a silence that stretched across the room. Everyone would gather around the table, and I would watch as my parents tried to fill the space. But nothing could. Nothing could fill the gap of a missing person, especially not during the holidays. I would sit there, trying to smile, trying to participate, but I couldn't stop thinking about what it would be like if my sibling was there. Would we be joking around, reminiscing about childhood memories? Would we be arguing over the last piece of pie like we always did? Would they even recognize me now? I couldn't help but wonder if they still remembered what it felt like to be part of something, to be part of us. Those thoughts would swirl in my mind, making it hard to focus on anything else. The holidays felt like a cruel reminder of what we had lost, and the empty chair in front of me only made it more real. Thanksgiving was particularly difficult. I would sit there watching my parents as they tried to carry on with the traditions we used to have. There was no more running to the kitchen to steal bites of turkey or debating who was going to carve the roast. Now, it was just the two of them, trying to pretend like everything was okay. But I could see the sadness in their eyes too. They tried to hide it, but I knew. I felt it too. It was like we were all pretending that the hole in our family didn't exist, but we all knew it was there. Christmas was no better. The decorations would go up, and the house would fill with the smell of pine and cinnamon, but it never felt like Christmas without my sibling. I could almost hear their voice in the background, singing along to carols, or complaining about the Christmas lights not working. It was the small things that I missed the most, the silly, insignificant moments that used to fill our days. Those were the things that made the holidays feel whole. Without them, everything just seemed incomplete. It wasn't just the holidays themselves that hurt. It was the anticipation, the weeks leading up to them, when I would try to picture what it would be like if my sibling were there. I would imagine us sharing the same space again, even if just for one day, pretending like everything was the way it used to be. But when the day actually arrived, I would find myself staring at the empty chair, unable to escape the reality that they weren't coming. No phone call, no message, nothing. And so I would keep up the facade. I would smile, I would participate, but inside, there was always that nagging feeling. I couldn't escape the feeling of longing, of wishing that things were different. I knew I wasn't the only one feeling it. My parents felt it too. But we all dealt with it in our own ways, trying to make the best of a situation that was far from ideal. As the years passed, the holidays became more routine. The pain of the absence, though still present, became something I could hide more easily. I learned to numb myself to it, to pretend that everything was fine. But there were still moments when I would sit at the table, staring at the empty seat across from me, and the weight of it would hit me all over again. No matter how much time passed, no matter how many holidays I celebrated without my sibling, that empty chair would always remind me of what we had lost. And then there was the inevitable question that would always linger in the back of my mind. Was my sibling experiencing the same thing? Were they sitting at their own holiday table, feeling that same emptiness, wondering where I was? Were they haunted by the absence of our shared memories as I was? I would never know, and that uncertainty only added to the ache in my chest. The holidays would come and go, and each time that empty chair would remain. But with it came a bittersweet understanding that no matter how much time passed, no matter how many empty chairs I sat in, I would never forget the person who used to sit across from me. They would always be a part of me, even if they were no longer physically present. The day we crossed paths, it was purely by chance, or so it seemed, that we found each other again. One of those moments when the universe, in its mysterious way, decides that two lives that should never have crossed paths again will. I never expected it, and I certainly wasn't prepared for it. It all started with a family event, one of those obligatory gatherings where people come together out of tradition, but not necessarily out of desire. It was a distant relative's wedding, one of those events where everyone is there, but no one really knows each other. My mom had insisted I go, probably hoping the distraction would pull me out of the numbness I'd been living in. I walked into the venue, the sounds of chatter and clinking glasses overwhelming my senses. The place was full of unfamiliar faces, people I had never seen before, people who didn't know the real me, the version of me that had grown up with a sibling by my side. As I moved through the crowd, scanning for anyone familiar, I heard someone call my name. At first, I didn't think anything of it, just another distant relative trying to catch my attention. But then, I turned, and there they were. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe for a moment. It was them. It wasn't the reunion I had imagined, the reunion I had dreamt of in my mind for years. It wasn't a dramatic, tear-filled embrace or the relief of finally seeing each other after so much time apart. It was just them, standing there, just as shocked to see me as I was to see them. For a second, it felt like I was staring at a stranger. They looked different, of course. Older, more mature, with a life I knew nothing about. Their face had changed, their hair was different, and their posture had shifted. There were things I didn't recognize, and yet everything about them still felt familiar. The way they stood, the way their eyes met mine. It was as if we had never been apart. "Is it really you?" I heard myself ask, the words slipping out before I could stop them. They smiled, a hesitant smile, as if they too were unsure of the reality they were facing. "I think so," they replied, their voice just as I remembered it. It sent a chill down my spine. How could something so simple, something so familiar, still feel so foreign? We stood there for a moment, both unsure of what to do. Should we hug? Should we speak? Should we pretend like we didn't just lose years of our lives? It felt like we were both trapped in a moment that was too big for either of us to handle, yet too important to ignore. And then, just like that, we started talking. It was awkward at first, like we were two people meeting for the very first time. The years between us felt like a thick fog, obscuring the memories, the connection, everything that once was. But as the conversation progressed, something began to happen. It was small at first, just a shared laugh, a familiar look, a reference to something from our childhood. Slowly, we found our footing, even if it was tentative and uncertain. It was surreal. There we were, two strangers who were supposed to be siblings, trying to remember who we had been to each other. I asked about their life, about everything I had missed, about the person they had become in all those years I hadn't known them. And they asked me the same questions, with that same longing in their eyes, the longing to bridge the gap of lost time. For a moment, I could almost forget the pain of the years lost, the silence that had defined our relationship for so long. But the truth was, we couldn't go back. We couldn't pretend like the distance, the silence, and the years had never existed. They were there, lurking beneath the surface of our words, our smiles, and our laughter. But it didn't matter. Not in that moment. All that mattered was that we were here now. We were standing in front of each other, breathing the same air, sharing the same space. It was like a dream I had waited for, but had never thought would come true. I realized then that meeting them again wasn't just about the reunion. It was about understanding that no matter how much time had passed, no matter how much distance had been created between us, we were still connected. It was a bond that couldn't be erased, Not by time, not by silence, not by anything. There we were, standing in a crowded room, two people who had once shared everything, now reconnecting after years of being apart. And even though the world around us continued to spin, continued to move forward without us, we both knew one thing for certain. We were a stranger in my past. The first few moments were filled with nervousness and disbelief. It was as if we had both stepped into a time warp, unsure of where we stood in the timeline of each other's lives. I stood there, looking at them, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if they were the person I remembered or if they were a stranger in my past, someone I had once known but lost to time. We were caught in a strange limbo, somewhere between familiarity and unfamiliarity. How do you approach someone who once shared your world but now feels like they belong to someone else's? I tried to form words, but they stuck in my throat, heavy with the weight of everything that had passed between us. There was so much unsaid, so many years we couldn't just ignore. It was as if the silence between us had become a wall, and I wasn't sure how to break through it. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times in my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for the strange, almost paralyzing feeling of standing face to face with the person I had once known so intimately, and yet, now, barely recognized. We both stood there, awkwardly, as if waiting for the other to make the first move. Neither of us knew how to start. How do you greet a sibling you haven't seen in years? Do you hug? Do you ask how they've been? Or do you pretend that all that time, all that silence, didn't matter? The moment stretched on, the tension thick between us. I watched their eyes flicker nervously, and I felt the same unease in myself. I wanted to bridge the gap, to reach out, but it felt almost impossible. There was a part of me that feared disturbing the fragile surface of this reunion. What if it fell apart? What if this reunion, this chance meeting, didn't live up to the expectations that had built up in my mind over the years? And then, as if some unspoken understanding passed between us, we both took a step forward. It was like the magnetic force that had drawn us together was suddenly stronger than the years of silence. In a single, almost imperceptible moment, the years between us began to melt away. The barrier that had kept us apart for so long was slowly crumbling, piece by piece. We spoke, at first tentatively, as if testing the waters. The questions came out in a flood, questions we had both held on to for far too long. "What have you been up to all these years?" I asked, the words sounding strange in my own ears. Had I really been this disconnected from them for so long? The question felt like a foreign language, one I had almost forgotten how to speak. They hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," they said, their voice a little shaky. It was as if they, too, were struggling to find the right words, to bridge the gap of all that lost time. We both laughed, though it was a hollow sound, a little forced, as if we were trying to convince ourselves that everything was fine. In that moment, we were strangers in each other's past, but the bond was still there, unspoken, like a thread pulling us closer. The years had changed us both, but there was still something about the way we interacted, the way we looked at each other, that felt deeply familiar. It was the same connection we had once shared, the same comfort in each other's presence. And yet now, it felt like we were strangers. There was an odd, bittersweet sense of nostalgia in the air, the kind that only comes when you're standing in front of something you've lost and realized you'll never get back. It was painful, but it was also comforting. It was as if I was seeing a part of my past that I thought had disappeared forever. The more we spoke, the more I realized how much I had missed, how much I hadn't known about their life. The years apart had created gaps in our shared history, and in some ways, it felt like I was meeting them for the first time. They had become someone else, someone with a life that I had never been part of. But still, despite the strangeness, there was a pull, an undeniable force that kept us tethered to each other. It was a quiet understanding, an unspoken realization that even though we were no longer the people we once were, we were still us, in a way. The connection was there, buried beneath all the years of silence, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that familiar warmth again. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't the reunion I had imagined in my fantasies. But it was real, and it was happening, and in that small, quiet space between us, I realized that no matter how much we had changed, we were still family, rediscovering each other. It was awkward at first. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly between us now felt clumsy, like we were strangers fumbling for words that should have come naturally. The easy banter, the inside jokes we used to share, all of it seemed distant, buried beneath the layers of time and silence that had built up between us. I found myself searching for the right things to say, unsure of where to start, unsure of how to bridge the gap. Was it too soon to ask about the past? Was it even okay to bring up the years we'd spent apart? Every word felt like a step into unfamiliar territory. There was a part of me that longed for the comfort of the sibling I had once known, but it was difficult to reconcile that memory with the person standing in front of me now, someone who had lived a completely different life without me, someone who had, in some ways, become a stranger. We both hesitated at first. Small talk filled the space between us, the kind of polite conversation you have with someone you don't know well. How's life been? What have you been up to? The questions were safe, surface level, but beneath them, I could feel the weight of everything unspoken. We were tiptoeing around the past, afraid of disturbing the fragile peace we'd created in this strange moment. But with every word, every awkward laugh, we began to peel back the layers. Slowly, piece by piece, we started to rediscover who we were. It wasn't an easy process. It was messy, filled with uncomfortable pauses and nervous glances. But with each passing moment, the years of silence began to dissolve. The awkwardness remained, but it wasn't as thick as it had been at the beginning. It was like dust being swept away, revealing the foundation beneath. I started to remember things, little details that I hadn't thought about in years. The way they smiled when they were nervous, the way their voice would crack when they were trying to sound more confident than they felt. These small, forgotten things began to surface, and with them, a sense of familiarity returned. It was like meeting a stranger who shared your deepest roots, a person who you didn't know in the present, but whose essence was still woven into the fabric of your past. As the conversation continued, we started to open up more. Slowly, we ventured into the deeper topics, our lives since the divorce, how we had both changed, the things we had been through without each other. The pain of those lost years was still there, lingering beneath the surface, but it was no longer the focus. Instead, we found ourselves laughing at things that once seemed trivial, but now held so much meaning. The awkward silences between us became less frequent, and the walls we had both built around ourselves started to crumble. It was strange, realizing how much I had missed, how much I had lost in the years we hadn't spoken. I had created this image in my mind of the person they had become, but standing there, talking with them, I realized how little I truly knew. Yet, there was something comforting about that, about the idea that we were still figuring each other out, still rediscovering the bond we had once shared. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. In that moment, I understood something important. Reconnecting wasn't going to be instant. It wasn't going to be the same as it had been when we were children, when everything felt simpler, but it didn't have to be. The connection was still there, even if it had been buried beneath years of silence. And with every word we exchanged, every small step toward understanding, it began to come back to life, confronting the past. As the days passed, our conversations began to deepen. What had started as awkward small talk slowly transformed into something more meaningful. We began to talk about our lives, our experiences since the divorce, the pain we had both carried, and the things we had never been able to say. It was inevitable, really. The silence between us had always been a barrier, but the more we spoke, the more the unsaid things, the things we had both buried for years, came to the surface. Our parents' divorce, which had once seemed like the kind of thing we should just move past, was now impossible to ignore. Neither of us had fully acknowledged the emotional toll it had taken on us. We had lived separate lives, but the pain of being torn apart by the people we trusted the most still lingered. We had both suffered in our own ways, but we had never shared that pain with each other. There had always been too much distance, too much silence. And now, standing face to face, those feelings came rushing back. I could see it in their eyes, the same frustration, the same confusion. Do you ever wonder what could have been? They asked one day, and I could feel the weight of those words settle between us. The question had no simple answer, no easy way to address it. What could have been? What if our parents had stayed together? What if we hadn't been forced to live in two different worlds? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what could have been. All I knew was that their choice had shaped everything about my life, and it had shaped theirs too. There was a moment of silence, a long pause where neither of us knew what to say. And then, almost like an eruption, we both started talking at once, about the anger, the confusion, the things we had never said. I could hear it in their voice, the years of pent-up frustration, the emotions that had never had an outlet. And I realized as I listened to them that I had never fully processed my own feelings about what had happened. It wasn't just the separation. It was the way our lives had been upended, the way we had been forced to adapt to a new reality without the support we needed. I felt abandoned, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. The realization hit me like a wave. I had never truly allowed myself to feel that way, to admit that I had been left behind. But standing there, talking with my sibling, it became clear how deeply our parents' actions had affected us. They nodded, their face somber. "I know," they replied softly. I felt it too. There was something healing about acknowledging the truth, about finally giving voice to the feelings we had both carried in silence for so long. We hadn't been able to change what had happened, but at that moment, we began to heal from it. It wasn't an instant fix. The anger didn't disappear, and the frustration didn't vanish. But talking about it, confronting the past together, was the first step toward releasing it. We started to share the pieces of our lives we had kept hidden from each other for years. The lonely nights, the struggles to adjust to a new home, the confusion of watching our family crumble and not knowing how to make sense of it. We spoke about how, in the absence of each other, we had both tried to fill the gaps with other things, other people, other distractions, but nothing had ever felt as real as the bond we had lost. For the first time in years, we could talk openly about our parents' divorce without the shame or guilt we had carried for so long. It was liberating in a way, to let go of the burden of secrecy. And in that shared space, I realized something important. Our pain wasn't something we had to carry alone anymore. Facing the past together didn't make it go away, but it gave us the chance to rebuild, to start the process of healing. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the pieces of our fractured family were beginning to come together again, healing the wounds. Slowly but surely, we began to heal. The weight of the past, once so heavy and suffocating, began to feel a little lighter. It wasn't an instant transformation. It wasn't like flipping a switch or erasing the years of pain and separation. But with every conversation, every moment shared, we began to put the pieces of our fractured bond back together. At first, it felt like we were testing the waters. Would the things we used to laugh about still hold the same magic? Would the things we once shared, our jokes, our silly memories, feel as genuine as they had when we were children? The uncertainty was there, lingering in the background. There were still moments of awkwardness, moments when the silence between us felt heavy again. But with every step forward, we became more comfortable. Slowly, the laughter returned. We started to talk about the things we had never spoken about before, the little things that made our bond special, the moments that once seemed so trivial but had shaped who we were. We shared memories of our childhood, remembering the way we used to run through the house together, the way we fought over the smallest things, only to laugh about them minutes later. Those memories were like fragments of a life we thought we had lost forever. And now, they were starting to come back, not as painful reminders, but as pieces of the foundation we could rebuild upon. The more we spoke, the more we realized how much we had missed. There was a comfort in rediscovering the things that once made us feel safe, those moments of familiarity, those reminders of a time when everything seemed simpler. Even the quiet moments, where words weren't needed, felt like a balm for the wounds that had festered for so long. It wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about acknowledging that the bond we had, though broken, was still there, waiting to be mended. We also began to create new memories, ones that would be ours, untainted by the past. We started spending more time together, going to dinner, watching movies, talking about our lives now. It was strange at first to see them as an adult, to realize how much time had passed since we were last truly together. But in those moments, I could feel the connection growing stronger, slowly but surely. The pain of the past began to lose its grip on us. It didn't disappear completely, and the scars would always be there, but they no longer defined who we were. We had lived through a lot, and we had both changed in ways we couldn't have imagined when we were younger. But what mattered now was that we were choosing to move forward, together. There were still things we needed to work through, still moments where the past would resurface, but they didn't feel as insurmountable anymore. We had learned to confront our past without letting it control us. We had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting, about acknowledging the hurt, and choosing to move past it. As we spent more time together, I realized how much I had taken for granted. The bond we had shared as children had never really disappeared. It had just been buried under years of silence and distance. Now I could feel it again, like a thread connecting us, a lifeline that had never truly frayed, just been hidden beneath the weight of time. And with each passing day, I began to understand something that had always eluded me. Healing wasn't a destination. It wasn't a moment when everything suddenly became okay. It was a journey. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on that journey, not alone, but with my sibling by my side. The wounds of the past no longer defined us. The bond we had once shared was being rebuilt, piece by piece. And as we moved forward together, I realized that there was nothing we couldn't face, as long as we faced it together. A new beginning. We began to forge a new relationship, though neither of us had a manual for how to do it. How do you rebuild something that was once so strong, but was broken and left to crumble over the years? There was no guide for how to reconnect after all the distance, all the silence, and all the time spent apart. But one thing was clear: we were willing to put in the effort. The past had shaped us, but it didn't have to define us. We were choosing to start again, to rewrite our story, and it felt like the first step towards something better. At first, it was still a bit awkward. Our conversations felt a little forced, like we were both testing the waters to see how deep the connection could go. But as we spent more time together, it became easier. The small talk that had once felt like a chore now felt like a bridge to something more. We began to share more than just the surface-level things. Our conversations grew deeper, touching on our dreams, our fears, our hopes for the future. The walls that had been built over the years started to come down, little by little. The questions that once seemed unanswerable, how did we get here? Why did this happen to us? Started to fade. Instead of focusing on what we had lost, we started talking about what we could gain. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but about learning from it. Our shared history became a foundation, not something to fear or avoid. We had survived the hardest part, and now it was time to build something new, together. We realized that the bond we once shared was still there. It had never completely disappeared, even though we had been apart for so long. The laughter returned, the inside jokes resurfaced, and the comfort of being with someone who truly understood you slowly began to fill the space that had been left behind. It wasn't the same as it had been, but it didn't need to be. We weren't the same people we were back then, and our relationship didn't need to be either. Instead, we began to create something that was uniquely ours, something built on the foundation of our past, but with room to grow. Our relationship wasn't about trying to return to what we had lost. It was about moving forward, about forging a new connection that was just as strong, if not stronger, than the one we had before. We were no longer trying to fix the past. We were building a future. There were still moments when the pain of what we had lost crept in, when we remembered the years that had been stolen from us. But those moments became less frequent, and when they did arise, they no longer felt as overwhelming. We had learned how to hold the past in one hand and the present in the other, understanding that both had a place in our lives. We could grieve what we had lost, but we didn't have to let it keep us from moving forward. Our past was no longer something to fear, but a foundation for the future. We had learned to forgive, to understand, and to rebuild. And with each passing day, our connection grew stronger. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was ours. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same path again. The uncertainty that had once defined our relationship was gone, replaced by a shared sense of hope for what was to come. We weren't just siblings reconnecting after years of silence. We were partners in this journey of rediscovery, of healing, and of building a new life together. Looking ahead, our story was no longer about what we had lost, but about what we were gaining. We had spent so many years focused on the pain of separation, on the absence, the silence. But now, as we stood together, looking at the future, I realized something important. The past, while significant, was no longer the center of our lives. What mattered now was the connection we were building. What mattered now was the bond we were reclaiming, step by step. We were no longer strangers, we were family. That simple truth felt both profound and comforting. The distance between us had been immense, and yet, we had found our way back to each other. What had once been lost, we were slowly rediscovering. The years apart didn't erase the love we had once shared. It had only buried it under layers of time and hurt. But now, those layers were peeling away, and we were free to embrace each other again. As we talked, we both acknowledged the things we had missed, the shared moments, the things we had taken for granted. But there was no bitterness, no regret. Instead, we focused on the fact that we were here, together, and that was enough. We didn't need to fix everything at once. What we needed was to cherish what we had now, to keep building on the foundation we were laying for the future. There was a quiet strength in the way we spoke, in the way we laughed, in the way we shared our hopes and dreams for the years to come. We had both grown, and in that growth, we had learned to appreciate each other in ways we hadn't before. We weren't the same people we had been as children, and our relationship wasn't the same. But that didn't make it any less meaningful. It made it stronger, deeper. It was a new kind of bond, one built on understanding, forgiveness, and the desire to move forward together. As we looked ahead, I realized that the past no longer had the power to define us. We had chosen to break free from its grip, to step into the future with open hearts. There would still be challenges, moments of doubt, and perhaps even setbacks. But this time, we faced them together. This time, we were no longer divided. We were a team, partners in a new chapter of our lives. And with that realization came a vow, one we made to each other, quietly but with unwavering certainty. We would never let go. No matter what came our way, no matter the obstacles, we would hold on. Our bond had been tested, but it had survived. And now, as we moved forward, we would protect it, nurture it, and never let it slip away again. The journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. But now, we had each other to lean on, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that. Epilogue. The years have passed, and our story has continued to unfold in ways we never could have imagined. The bond we once thought was broken beyond repair has not only been mended, but strengthened in ways that only time and shared experience can create. We've faced challenges together, laughed together, and shared moments of vulnerability that have brought us closer than ever before. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far we've come. There were times when it felt like the silence would never end, when the distance between us seemed too vast to bridge. But we've learned that healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a process, one that requires patience, understanding, and most of all, the willingness to move forward, together. What I've learned through all of this is that family isn't just about blood. It's about the connections we choose to nurture, the bonds we decide to fight for. And though our parents' divorce had torn us apart in ways that seemed impossible to heal, it also gave us the opportunity to rebuild something even stronger. We didn't just find each other again, we rediscovered who we were as individuals and as family, and in that rediscovery, we found a new kind of love. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, times when we questioned if it was too late to make up for lost time, but we kept moving forward. We leaned on each other, supporting one another through the ups and downs of life. We made new memories, some big and others small, but all of them significant in their own way. We learned that our past didn't define us. It shaped us, but it didn't dictate our future. We were the ones in control of what came next. And what came next was a future built on understanding, forgiveness, and love. As I sit here now, looking at the person who was once a stranger, and now feels like the closest person in my life. I realize how precious this bond is. It's not perfect, and it doesn't need to be. What matters is that it's real, it's ours, and it's unbreakable. I no longer fear the past, because it's no longer something I have to hide from. It's part of me, part of who I've become, and part of the beautiful, complicated relationship I share with my sibling. The scars are still there, but they no longer hurt. They remind me of how far we've come, how much we've healed. And as we look ahead, there's one thing I know for sure. We will never let go again. This time, we're in it for the long haul, together.